ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you kindly to our third conference organized by FUEN and the Foundation of German Dispossessed Persons. And so I also welcome Mrs. Pences and Mr. Markov, who are responsible for organizing the meeting in spite of the Corona situation. We have had 2 meetings, and meaning we've had preparatory presentations regarding minority protection, anchoring minorities, and we have covered several countries like Germany, Poland, Romania, and Slovenia in the first meeting. In the second one in February, Austria, Italy, and the Czech Republic. We want to continue this way, and we want to have one speaker, welcome one speaker who can talk theoretically about these topics, and one speaker reporting from the practical sphere and also talk critically about the conditions. And we have a big program ahead of us. And if we want to Hungary, Croatia, and Slovakia, once we've covered them today, we have only discussed 10 states. Europe has 27 members, and we want to look beyond Europe as well. And next time, Ukraine is also involved with Mr. Kudachenko from the Academy of Sciences. And perhaps we will manage to have 30 countries of Europe covered at the end. And I would like to point out, it's also at the same time note to the speakers, we want to publish all presentations afterwards. And so we also expect that you can submit, distribute your presentations in writing to the responsible people in order to publish them next year with a publisher. And so much regarding our preparation, and that you can see that our meeting is important because in Europe, I think we have estimated about more than 300 minorities who all have their legal interest and their valid interests, and they are fighting for their equal rights. But we've also heard that minority protection does not only mean equal rights and equal treatment, but also be positioned in a better way. That's what the FUEN and the cultural foundations are fighting for. And this is what the speakers will talk about today. Therefore, thank you for your participation and supporting this important task that we're doing. I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Markus Pieper, who is a member of the European Parliament, and would like to ask him for his welcoming words. Many thanks, Mr. Professor Gorning. I would like to thank you for the invitation, and I would like to connect it with my greetings from the European Parliament. And we know about the importance of your institution, of your organizations, and we are happy that the focus today is on Hungary, Croatia, Slovakia, on the topic of minority protection, the rights of ethnic minorities. You have 300 minorities you mentioned before. There is a lot to do, and you know that the minority problems have their origins in Europe due to the geopolitical new order, new construction. After the Second World War, the breakdown of monarchies brought about new states, and it was defined according to the national state principle. And these states were ethnically not homogeneous. So therefore, conflicts started if you just look at Austria-Hungary. And then with the Second World War, we have the second big cut. Of course, it was about it was then about people being driven away. My parents are from Eastern Prussia, and it was also about eviction there. I was talking to my grandmother many times about this. We created a small brochure, and therefore this is close to my heart. Therefore, I'm very happy that the FUN, as well as the Cultural Foundation of the expelled people, are keeping this culture of remembrance alive. And it's more about the topic of minority rights today. Of course, when it comes to the culture of remembrance, that can no longer be a focus, but even more, it's important now that we look after those minorities in the national states who are demanding their minority rights, their language rights, that we find a European platform for it, that we also offer legislative options, opportunities for them. And I can imagine that for you, when it comes, it caused irritations that the Minority Safeback Initiative, MSPI initiative, was not reflected or accepted in the European Commission that we expected in the European Parliament, and many national states expected it. Well, that's the situation as it is. But on the other hand, we have really focused on this topic many times, and I think it's very important that we get active on your behalf, because we have a very bad renaissance of nationalistic tendencies, and especially in the border regions, these are very problematic at the moment. And all of you know, when it comes to Upper Silesia, what happened there when they had the referendum and it led to bloody conflict. It's 100 years ago, and therefore I would never get such conflicts on a European soil. And in some regions in Europe, it's still critical. And I'm sure we'll hear about this today. Finally, I would like to assure you that, of course, you do have a lobby, not just in the European Parliament, but also in the European Commission. The Commission President herself has voiced her support of your affairs, and the Commissioner for Education Innovation also took up your interest, Mrs. Gabriel. So therefore, you do have support, and I can also envisage that once, even though the safe package wasn't successful, maybe it's also due to the fact that the signatures were coming from a certain region, from 80% of them. Maybe I would like to urge you to try an initiative 2.0, and then maybe to become more successful. I think with this initiative, you have created a knowledge, and of course it is justified. And I think that we in the European Parliament, and I think we have developed a certain special interest for it. And I think it's great that you, with the FUN and also with the Cultural Foundation, always point out these minority rights, do it in a credible way, and also become politically active and ask for measures. And because your interests and your matters are absolutely important, and you will always find an open ear with us. And And you also have a president that is supporting your matters. And therefore, I hope that your mission, and I know your mission is a very important one, and I hope it will find a justified support on many European levels and institutions. And therefore, I wish you a successful meeting and mostly health. And I would like to also be physically present in one of these meetings. And it's important because it's important to establish networks. And it's even though it's been organized fantastically, this video format, but it's not the same as the personal contact. You need a glass of beer and a glass of wine in order to confirm these things. And but I still wish you a successful meeting, and thank you again for the invitation and all the best for your initiative. Many thanks, and I totally agree with you. The personal meeting, of course, is very important, and I want to point out that we try to have this meeting in Berlin in the Hungarian embassy, and it would have been possible there with a good meal and some good Hungarian wine to have personal talks. I attend many meetings, and therefore I would like to say the talks during the coffee break and in the evening is sometimes more important than the actual presentations. And hopefully we will get the vaccination at some point, and also one that is being produced here 1 kilometer behind me in Marburg and is being exported to Africa at the moment. Maybe it will come to us as well. So I would like to hand over the moderation now to Mrs. Goreng. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, unfortunately, now I know what we have to do away with today, what we can't have, beer and good wine, but we won't do away with our exchange of thoughts and ideas. Minority protection and the rights of ethnic minorities in Central and Eastern Europe is our topic today, and I would like to welcome you from the heart of the Lausitz, and I hope for an exciting afternoon. The competence for the acknowledgement and the recognition of minority groups, that's something that we have to deal with in all our lives, and of course, it's the responsibility of the individual states, first of all. And even though France, for example, most of countries have signed the European Charter for Minorities, but the 3 countries that we have in our focus today, they have done it. But minority protection in the different countries is developing differently historically due to political, historical, and economic reasons. And today, I'm very excited to get this comparison today. We are not looking at the political framework conditions, but in the immediate comparison, we will also look at the practice sphere, the practical sphere, and you are all invited to talk about your experiences and also the weak parts, and let us know and discuss it with the speaker. We talk about Hungary, Croatia, and Slovakia, where we have presentations. Maybe you know it also from the previous meetings, but I would like to repeat it. Firstly, we hear a presentation of the minority protection in the individual countries, the legal side, then the impulsive presentation regarding the practical sphere, then the option to ask questions and to give comments. And that also is possible in the chat. Roman Roblek mentioned it. He will have an eye on the chat and then will be accompanying us in case I lose the overview. and so I can give the floor to everyone who requested. I would like to give now the microphone to Mr. Zolas Voltan-Wiebe. Zolas has studied law at the Athos Lorand University in Budapest. Did his doctors in economics in the University of Leuven, and he's also specialized on minority rights. And since 2002, he's been working at the Institute of the Minority Studies at the Center of Social Sciences in the Hungarian Center of Excellence, and he is also a professor for international right at the Faculty of Public Administration and International Studies of the Ludwig University. And Voláš Vízi teaches at the Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. He is author of several publications regarding minority affairs in the context of the European integration, and he's also co-publisher of several books on minority protection. And now I hand the floor to your to give you a presentation. Thank you very much. Many thanks. I would like to continue in English since my time is
to put it in a modest way. I would like to share my PowerPoint presentation. I hope it will work without any problems. It will help us to just give a brief overview of the Hungarian minority rights protection system. And my German is not at the highest quality to put it in a modest way. So first of all, I would just give you a broad overview of what kind of communities are we talking about in Hungary. And here you can see the latest census, which was conducted in 2011. And the numbers indicate the people, the persons who declared their minority in one way or another in the 2011 census. And in brackets, you can see the changes respect to the previous census in 2001. It gives you the impression that the number of people belonging to minorities has increased from 2001 till 2011. But we have to be careful with these numbers, because the people who do not declare their identity is still relatively high at the census. And most of the people who affiliate with one of the other communities to the liberty to declare their Hungarian nationality as well. The census allows to indicate double or multiple identities. As a matter of fact, most of the minority communities in Hungary are relatively small. Altogether, they represent about 8–10% of the total population of the country. Most of them live in very small communities. You could hardly find any local municipality or village where one or other minority community would form a majority. And they usually have double identities, dual identities, and are at the advanced stage of linguistic assimilation. This means also that the minority communities in Hungary are not really mobilized in political arena. They are much more focused on cultural, linguistic issues. And there is also an important difference between the different minority communities. The Roma, the largest minority group in Hungary, faces serious challenges in their social inclusion, economic marginalization. In this way, they are much less socially integrated into the mainstream society than all the other communities. We will see that later what kind of problems does this create for the accommodation of Roma in the minority rights system. The Hungarian legislation developed parallelly with the democratic transition in 1989-1990, and unlike in many other countries where fierce nationalist clashes determined the discussion about identity and minority rights, in Hungary there has been an open discussion on inclusion and on minority rights already from 1989. And together with the political transition, the constitutional reform incorporated also the recognition of the specific rights of minorities living in Hungary. There were two reasons for that. One was that, as I mentioned, the minority communities in Hungary were not politically mobilized. They were not, in this sense, politically relevant, or did not present a threat to the mainstream society. And on the other hand, the Hungarian political elite and the Hungarian public opinion was very much concerned about the fate of Hungarian minorities living in neighboring countries. And we are talking about very significant communities. Today, 1.5 million Hungarians in Romania, almost 500,000 in Slovakia, and so on. So there was a double concern that on one hand, basically does not cost anything to the political elite to offer generous rights to the minorities living in Hungary. And on the other hand, it can present a good example for the neighboring states on how to deal with minorities on their own territory. This was not only reflected in the constitutional amendment of 1989-1990, but also in the adoption of the Minority Rights Act in 1993, which introduced a special form of minority self-government with some territorial elements, but mainly as an institution of cultural autonomy. This Minority Rights Act was reformed in 2005, but later it was replaced in 2011 after the new constitution was adopted. I would just like to go through the major elements of this legislation, and the implementation I will leave out. The law in 1993 recognized 13 minority communities, mainly on historical basis, from very small communities to large ones. The difference you could see in the census as well, that the number of Poles or Armenians is 1,000 to 3,000 people, while the number of Roma is 300,000 people around. So they try to recognize any potential community that could claim minority rights, but it also kept the door open for other minorities to be recognized later. There is a condition that if a minority wants to be recognized as such, it needs to prove that the community has been present in Hungary for at least 100 years, and it must collect 1,000 supporting signatures and submit it to the Hungarian parliament, which will take the decision based on the opinion of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. There have been a few examples or cases when the criteria has been met formally, but the parliament did not recognize any other minority community so far than the 13 listed by the law. The constitution recognized the minorities in Hungary as state constituting part of the sovereign people of the Hungarian nation, and in this sense to ensure their collective participation in public affairs, to foster their cultures, to use their native languages, education in mother language, and to use their names in native languages. And parallel to that, the new constitution had also an article on the responsibility of Hungary for the Hungarians living outside its borders. Between 1991 and 2003, there have been other bilateral treaties signed with most of the neighboring countries on the protection of minorities. This also affects the situation of minorities living in Hungary. In 2011, after the landslide victory of the Fidesz at the elections, a new fundamental law, a new Grundgesetz, a new constitution was adopted, and it changed the perspective, as the previous constitution did not have a preambulum, a proper preambulum, and it did not established official language or any other national identity elements in the constitution as such. The new fundamental law has a long preambulum, the so-called national avowal, which lists the historic achievements of the Hungarian nation, but it also recognizes the nationalities living with us in Hungary as it is formulated, and it grants them the opportunity, the right to promote and safeguard their language and heritage as well. In this sense, it's a bit ambiguous, because on one side, the preambulum focuses on the Hungarian nation as a state constituting element, but on the other side, it also recognizes the nationalities as part of this Hungarian political nation in this sense. The constitution also keeps the previous legislation's achievements in the sense that it does not only recognizes linguistic, cultural, and education rights, but also keeps the institution of local and national self-governments for minorities. The difference is that it discarded the term minority and it introduced the term nationality, but basically there have not been any significant changes in the meaning of the term. Nationality is basically a synonym used for minority. Another important new element was that the fundamental law does not focus on collective rights to participation in public affairs, but it declares that the nationalities living in Hungary shall participate in the work of the parliament. And this can be realized either obtaining a preferential seat, which require a quarter of votes for a regular MP, so-called, or national spokespersons. All the 13 nationalities have a nationality spokesperson with no voting rights, but consultative rights, and very limited competence for legislative initiatives at the parliament. In this sense, the new constitution basically kept the tradition established by the 1989 democratic transition, and in 2011 a new act on the rights of nationalities was adopted, which can be also regarded as an organic development based on the previous legislative achievements. Nevertheless, this piece of legislation is a bit more complicated than the previous one was, and it offers clear definitions of certain terms that have not been defined beforehand, definition of cultural autonomy, of what nationality is, and what minority or nationality self-government is. It also keeps the 13 communities as recognized by law, and it also keeps the option for any other nationality to be recognized if the legislative criteria is met. The rights on nationalities does not only keep the definition of minorities, it also keeps the institution of nationality self-government and nationality cultural autonomy. It also gives a clear definition of both institutions. In this sense, the nationality self-government is the organization established by law and democratic elections that operates as a legal entity and that can exercise the collective rights of minorities, while the term national cultural autonomy is broader and it reflects the collective rights of nationalities to create their self-governing institutions and the totality of other nationality institutions. The law recognizes individual minority rights or nationality rights in a very similar way as the previous law has done, starting from the freedom of choosing minority language in giving name to preserve the names of minorities in minority language, to freely use mother tongue verbally and writing, and to use it in public education and in cultural activities. It's a rather broad set of individual rights, including also the importance of recognizing family relations, which may also be cross-border family relations of nationalities. The other set of rights established by the law are the collective rights, which basically concern not only the right to use insignia, locality names, street names in public sphere in areas where nationalities live, but also recognizes the nationality's right to establish and operate institutions, to take over institutions from other agencies, to offer education from kindergarten to grammar school education or higher education, and they can also be entitled to establish such education institutions. And collective rights include, besides education, rights related to media content services. They have the right to access information in their own language, and they have also the right to receive information from the Hungarian public broadcaster as well. Besides education and media, the importance of cultural rights are also recognized. They have the right to preserve, foster, and pass on their architectural, cultural, religious memories, traditions, and symbols. They can use their cultural national symbols as well, and they can set up associations, local national self-governments as a political dimension of collective rights. And as I mentioned, they have the right to be represented in the parliament. The nationality self-governments are organized at 3 levels: local level, regional level, and self-governments at national level. The 3 levels of nationality self-governments need to work in close cooperation, and mostly they have
Entschuldigung, Herr Vysi, ich unterbreche Sie ungern. Vielleicht
sorry, Mr. Vysi, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we would like to ask you to keep it shorter because we want to introduce 3 other countries today. So you should keep to your 10 minutes. Could you summarize, please?
This is my last slide. Yes. Sorry. So I just wanted to emphasize that nationality self-governments are organized at 3 levels, and the 3 levels need to cooperate closely. And at each level, they have mostly consultative rights with the local government and regional government or the national government. It gives a very delicate set of relations between the government representatives and the minority self-government representatives in their fight or their claims for financial resources, institutions, and other competencies. So thank you very much. That was a very brief overview of a complicated system, and thank you for your patience. Thank you very much.
Auch Ihnen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much to you as well. On my behalf, I have already received a first question, but I do believe that you will agree that after having listened to the basic legal aspects of minority laws, that we have a good basis already for a discussion, and that I would like to give the floor, first of all, to Dr. Elizabeth Sandos, who is going to give us a practical overview, her person. She studied law. She teaches at the University Pécs, and since 2004, she's a guest speaker at the University Babbage in Cluj. She has studied in various universities in Europe, Bayreuth, Budapest, Graz, Tennisburg, and she has also been a dean at the Faculty of Law in Pécs, where she has also been has had a chair about a national legislation. She has also been a director for the Center of European Research and Education, and presently she has she's also responsible for the online journal Page International European Law. Since 2016, she has been a member of the consultative committee of the Minority Framework Committee at the European Parliament. From 2013 to 2019, she had her first mandate as a steward, as shops ombudsman, and she has been re-elected for another 6 years. Just now, just recently. I'd like to give you the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to wish you a good afternoon to all, to the audience. Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope I can stick to my timing of 10 minutes, but I have to admit that it's really difficult to keep to such a short time, because I spent at least half of the day with the problems concerning the realization of minority rights. Now, if you allow, I'm going to speak partly in English and partly in German. And I'd also like to share my screen if possible, so I hope that it works out. I'm trying now, and it does work out.
Okay. Thank you for your attention again. So I will try to give you a short overview about the possible problems. Oh my God. Entschuldigung. About the problems I do face as an ombudsperson responsible for the nationalities living in Hungary, and I would say that I do understand that for English-speaking persons, the term nationality is somehow controversial. Well, based on what my colleague Balázs Vizi said, here you can see the basics of the situation of minority rights in Hungary, and what are the legal backgrounds for the activity of the ombudsperson responsible for minorities. Fundamental law, there is a national minority legislation you have seen in details previously. Of course, we have to count and we have to base our understanding of the rights and implementation of minority rights also based on equal treatment legislation. And then, of course, there is a kind of historical and social background and the heritage which we carry with us. And of course, there is an international environment we have to take into account when it comes to the implementation of minority rights. I will skip some slides because the main content you have heard a few minutes ago. Here are the 13 acknowledged nationalities living in Hungary, and it's also the list of individual and collective nationality rights. I will not use the time for speaking about them, but there is the point what I want first to share in more details with you, because there is the way how this special institution, which is the Deputy Commissioner for Fundamental Rights, acting as a minority ombudsperson, has in the Hungarian legal system. It's an ombudsman's type mandate. And what we can do is to monitor the implementation of the nationality the nationality law, the minority legislation, or understood together with the equality law legislation. So, and to promote, to engage in social awareness raising and information activities, to cooperate. And of course, there is one of the main points and the main tasks which the person has to fulfill who is acting as a minority ombudsperson. The values, and now we do speak about values which are common to all the previous persons who had the mandate, and there was Ernő Kállai and Jenő Kaltenbach. Well, here you can see it's about mainly awareness raising, early education in fundamental rights, promoting minority rights among the members of the majority society, and of course to promote the values connected to the nationalities or national minorities, as we are used to say in an international context. And of course there are priority areas and target groups which I do in person consider very important. Priority areas as a dialogue with existing minority organizations and existing NGOs, special target group, children, young people, affiliating with different minority groups. Of course, social media, raising awareness. And well, I will show you some figures in the coming slides, and I will show you through some tools I have at my disposal, the so-called general comments and joint reports, which will give you a picture about what kind of problems the national minority communities do face nowadays in Hungary. Of course, international relations as well, so, but I will skip that one. I think it's much more important to speak and to show you some numbers about the complaints, which this slide and this infographic shows what kind of numbers we have, how many complaints we have to handle, meaning that so many complaints do come from the members of the nationality communities, but it does not mean that this is the maximum possible problem, that the possible amount of problems in Hungary. One reason for this is that we do not have regional offices. So it's a Budapest-centered complaint procedure, so to say. And many of the members of the nationality communities or national minority communities do not really are aware of the fact that they can turn to us and they can bring their problems and complaints to us. there was an increase in numbers. In the last years, we made the possibility to turn to us and to investigate problems through social media, for example. And I think, of course, and we had to make available and to make more visible the activity. Okay, so of course, it's not easy now to speak faster, but the next, yeah, well, perhaps here, you see, between in the year 2020, of course, the situation, the pandemic, also had an influence and an impact on how many cases and how many complaints came to us. And well, that was a decrease in the number. So I will show you now some highlighted topics with what we had to work last year. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic and the state of emergency, which was declared by the government of Hungary first in March last year, had a significant impact, of course, not only on the nationality communities living in Hungary, but also on our work. You see here the main topics which we had to handle. National minority education is always a hot topic because of different reasons. So the working and financing of minority self-government. In 2020, we had to also handle and we had to investigate and we had to have discussions about the census issue, which, as you may know, in Hungary was postponed to 2022, to next year. So here you see the distribution of individual complaints, petitions, which were launched last year, and our inquiries ex officio in 2020 by national minorities. So it's perhaps not, I have to explain, the number of cases involving people belonging to the Roma ethnic community was the highest. We had to deal with petitions of the Roma community in 172 cases. The high number of cases, almost the half of all cases, and the content of the cases continue to indicate the pre-existing complex difficulties affecting the Roma population. And we have to, I have to say that the situation and the pandemic has exacerbated in a very, very big, it's very much, so to say. So you can see German complaints coming from the German community, 91. And of course, somehow the number of the complaints is also mirroring the number of the community itself. The next infographic shows you, I'm sorry, I think, I hope at least that you can see what kind of problems we had. The blue fields in the chart indicate the classical nationality cases, national minority culture, education, the rights of national minority self-governments, and the orange fields indicate the complaints, which are mainly a combination of minority rights and equal treatment issues. So it's hate speech, hate crime, discrimination based on belonging to a national minority in the work field. So, okay.
Oh, Elisabeth Schandoschola,
yes.
ich spreche Sie ungern, aber vielleicht kann ich da schon gleich eine Frage.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but maybe I can already ask you a question here. How do you act as an ombudswoman if you receive a complaint? What happens? Is it just going to be enter into the statistical figure, or is there a whole series of reactions? Of course, we have a whole chain of reactions. It does depend on what kind of complaint it is about and what a complainant is asking for. We have the obligation, the duty to raise this complaint to the public sector, to the governmental institution, hoping that we get an answer, and we're looking after them. And the petitioner always gets an answer. Sometimes he or she will have to wait for a longer time because it depends on the public authorities and the governmental bodies, whether they give us an answer on time or not. And here, something else I'd like to show you. What I can do as an ombudswoman, if it's a general problem, I can word a general comment, which is either the result of individual complaints about the same issue, or sometimes it's just an individual complaint. Here, for example, we have the case of an old Swabian cemetery. And then we had an issue with the preparation of the census in 2021. And unfortunately, we also have had many problems with segregation at school because of the Roma children. And also, we had a very broad problem, which was what can the local or the minority governments do about the pandemic? How can they implement the various regulations, health instructions? We had hefty quarrels about hate speech and hate crimes. So these are the typical cases. I'm sure that these issues will come back in the general discussion. I'm sorry, I've just realized that I've been speaking German, but never mind. I thank you very much. I have already a first question, which I would like to transfer. Can you tell us why the cases of the individual complaints from the German minority is the second largest? Is it just the size, or is it a sign for the fact that the German minority is confronted with more problems than other minorities, or are they just more susceptible? Do you want the answer now? Yes. Yes, we are just going into the discussion round now. My experience is the following. The Hungarian German community are very active. They have a larger number. There are more people than other minorities, and they are aware of their rights. And the Hungarian German minority has organized itself very well. And they know their legal rights. They can implement the legal possibilities because they are aware of them. And this reflects also that they do complain more often, more regularly. They confront themselves with problems they have, which maybe other smaller minority groups wouldn't bother about because they don't have that many institutions. So I think that's the point. I also have another question to the first speaker. Professor Wiesig, you said the Hungarian legislation started protecting minorities also because of the fact that there were two reasons. You said there were one reason was that they weren't politically relevant and didn't represent any danger. And secondly, the reservation about the Hungarians have, how their minorities are being treated abroad, elsewhere. Would that mean if any of these minority groups were politically active, would then these rights be removed? Or wouldn't they be created? Or is it just a wishful thinking or just a plea to the neighboring countries? Please make sure that you treat our Hungarian minorities well in your country.
Thank you for the question. I meant that at least in our region, in Central and Eastern Europe, we can see that when a minority community is numerous enough to form its own political party and to enter into political arena, it is not handled anymore as a question of minority rights, but as a political rivalry. And it enters into the political discussion about the state, about the distribution of resources, and so on. And in this sense, I think that it makes it more difficult for these in these societies the argument for a general minority protection regime. For example, in Romania or in Slovakia, you can see that there has not been a single law on minority rights adopted. And there may be many speculations why, but I think one of the reasons is that there are politically mobilized important minority communities there. Mm-hmm. And just a moment for the other question, that indeed the other motivation in Hungary was that these minority communities are so small and in an advanced stage of linguistic assimilation that they did not present, let's say, a political threat or a nationalistic threat to the majority society. In this sense, they were perceived much more as a vulnerable community that deserves some protection.
Ja, ich habe hier noch eine Frage von Entschuldigung.
I have a question. Yeah. It's a question of Sergio Constantin, who is asking which communities who fulfill the formal preconditions have applied for recognition, how many were rejected by the Hungarian parliament, and what were the reasons for it?
I know about two communities. One was the Bunyevci, who wanted to be recognized as a separate community from the Croatian nationality community, but they were considered as not having the characteristics of qualifying as a separate minority community. They are a folkloric part of the Croatian minority. And the other claim that has arrived to the parliament were the Huns. There was a traditionalist group claiming that even if they speak Hungarian, they are the descendants of the Huns, and they wanted to get recognition as a Hun minority, but it seemed to be baseless, I think, quite evidently.
I know about two other groups, the Russians and the Settlers, lastly.
Aha. Gut. Folgt noch eine Übersetzung? Nein. Dann danke ich erstmal.
Okay, then I will thank you, Mrs. Sanderscholler and Professor Wesi. And now we have progressed in time, and I will have to speed up so I can keep an eye on the time. Minority protection. It has become the most important matter of, and you can see that when the ethnic conflicts came about in the 90s, they had terrible effects, and now it's of course important that minority protection is being guaranteed, and you can create the conditions in the countries, and where also the groups in fewer numbers can exert their rights and also act against the discrimination. What is the legal situation in Croatia? Therefore, we have invited Mr. Boško Pikola, who will now give us an impression, an overview, some data. He is assistant professor at the Faculty for Political Science in Zagreb, where he is, among others, contemporary history, Cold War theory of war and peace. He did his master in international relations regarding international communities and post-conflict elections. He did his doctorate in comparative political science, and he also published numerous articles in Croatian scientific publications, and he works as a film critic for the Croatian television, Hrvatska Televisa, and in the Croatian Film Association, HRF, and he also works with Croatian NGOs and international NGOs, and he was consultant in many regional election projects and campaigns led by UNDP and UNDP, sorry, and he also recently published an article on hate speech in politics, and now I will hand the floor to you, Boško. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a great presentation, and thank you very much for your attention this afternoon. I'm going to share my presentation. I hope you can see it. Is it okay for all of you? So I'm going to speak on behalf of my professor, Siniša Tatalović, who is an expert in this area at the University of Zagreb, and of course, myself. I'm going to start the presentation from beginning. Well, we're going to talk about political representation of national minorities in the Republic of Croatia. This report first deals with some theoretical concepts of political representation of national minorities, but the central part of the report is an analysis.
Sorry, Mr. Pizzola, only one thing the interpreter said. Could you speak a bit louder, please?
A little bit louder, of course.
Okay.
Well, this report first deals with theoretical concepts of political representation of national minorities in Croatia, but the central part of this report analyzes minority political representation in Croatia. Croatia adopted the model of reserved seats for national minorities in the parliament, This is a Croatian parliament, Sabor, as well as the model of proportional representation on its local and regional levels. When you're talking about the political representation of national minorities, the starting point is studying the political representation for national minorities as a liberal tradition that has pretty different views on the rights of national minorities. On the one side are advocates of the protection of these rights and the need to preserve their identity, considering that these rights are part of the liberal tradition. But on the other side, they believe that the consistent insistence on individual citizens' rights makes some extra protection for national minorities redundant. The political representation of national minorities enters the field of tension between the dominant liberal understanding based on this idea of protecting individual rights of minority members and the democratic aspiration for equalizing the power of citizens, who leads the concept of social representation, according to which each relevant minority or social group should be represented and can only represent its members. You can see the map of Croatia with ethnic minorities. The red color represents Serbian minority, the brown Italian minority, green, light green Hungarian, purple Czech, and green Slovak minority. In the post-Cold War context and the context of Yugoslav wars, when the fear of ethnic conflicts grew, non-territorial autonomy became a very attractive idea and the model for the accumulation of interests of different ethnic groups in ethnically pluralist post-communist European states as former Yugoslavia was. Since the beginning of the 1990s, Croatia, as the independent state, has been faced with a need to develop an appropriate system of diversity management in the accreditation of the interests of its national minorities, and of course the definition of the framework for political participation in Croatian society while ensuring the protection of their identities. You can see, of course, the population of Croatia before and after the war. In 1991, as the part of former Yugoslavia, Croatia had approximately 4.8 million inhabitants and approximately 500,000 of Serbs. But after the war, total number of national minorities is absolutely less than in the period of pre-war Yugoslav period. So today, after the census in 2011, Croatia has approximately 10% of its minorities. Half of them are Serbian minority. The results of these censuses confirm that the earlier speculation about the dramatic change of the ethnic structure of the population in Croatia compared to pre-war context. The population census, according to the nationality of 2001 and 2011, has statistical data for 22 constitutionally recognized national minorities. So Croatia has 22 national minorities. The largest one is Serbian one with 4.4% of the total number of citizens, while all other national minorities together account for about 3 to 4. Reasons for this reducing is, of course, the context of war and all tragic circumstances after the broke of former Yugoslavia. Since the end of the 1995, war in Croatia and the peaceful reintegration of Eastern Slavonia, which was under the government of the United Nations until 1997, the design of a model for the protection of national minorities began. The model for the protection of national minorities in Croatia is based on two general principles. The first one is identity, and the second one is integration. The first principle of identity means that members of 22 national minorities have the right to develop their cultural and linguistic identity, and to this end they can organize and act through minority institutions and non-governmental organizations. When we are talking about the integration, the second principle means that all citizens are equal in their rights and, of course, obligations, that under the same conditions they can access public goods and exercise their interests. When it comes to the political representation of national minorities at the state level, national level, Croatia has initially decided on the model of guaranteed seats in the parliament for national minority representatives. So, in parliamentary elections, members of national minorities may elect to vote in one of the 10 general constituencies or in a special minority one with 8 mandates where minority representatives are elected. Serbian national minority have 3 mandates, the Italian and the Hungarian 1, and the Czechs and the Slovaks together 1. Also, 2 groups of national minorities elect 1 joint representative. In the first group are Austrians, Bulgarians, Germans, Poles, Roma, Romanians, Russians, Ukrainians, Russians, Turks, Blacks, and Jews. And in the other, post-Yugoslav nations, Albanians, Bosnians, Montenegrins, Macedonians, and Slovenes. After all, Croatia adopted the constitutional law on the rights of national minorities in 2002, regulating rights in the area of cultural autonomy and participation in decision-making processes at all levels of government, national, regional, and local. Under this act, the model of political representations should ensure that they, through their representatives, can express their interests and align them with the interests of other political actors presented in the Croatian parliament. In Croatia, as a post-conflict society, it was useful to introduce the possibility of political representation of national minorities, as it was assumed that this representation would not have been achieved in the regular electoral process. So, 8 representatives of national minorities were the coalition partners in the 3 former center-right governments, including actual one formed in 2020. Representatives of national minorities played a significant role in all 10 sessions of Croatian parliament so far. They also show great responsibility for the interest of the entire political community. So this showed a high level, I must say, of political integration of national minorities into Croatian society as the political actor. Well, I have to say that representatives of national minorities play an important role in the representative of national minority interests also in local and regional self-government. The legislator has set up a very wide choice of councils and representatives so that national minorities can choose their councils and representatives in a larger number of local communities, regional communities, towns, and counties. As a conclusion, in the corpus of representation of the interests of the national minorities, the Council for National Minorities of the Republic of Croatia plays an especially important role in which the representatives of all 22 national minorities participate. The activity of this council is directed towards the inclusion of national minorities in public life. Overall, the Institute of Minority Representation at all levels of government in Croatia has a pretty positive role in the post-conflict reconstruction of society, and of course, the integration of national minority in the political community, very different than in the war period, with of course, the preservation of their identities, cultural and political one. Thank you very much.
Das war ja fast eine Punktlandung.
Well, it was almost perfectly on time. Many thanks,
Thank you.
Mr. Vikola. You have created a bridge. You have built a bridge to Alexander Tollnauer. He is the chair of the national minorities of the Republic in Croatia. You have mentioned already what this council, what these tasks are of the council. Mr. Tollnauer will now present us the practical side. He is the chair of this council almost for 20 years. He's also a member of the subcommittee for the coordination of Croatian participation in the European territorial cooperation programs and macro-regional strategies of the European Union. Mr. Tollnauer studied administrative law in the University of Zagreb and has written several publications on the subject of minority rights. Throughout his life, he has been deeply engaged in the work of minorities, which has been honored several times, including with the Order of the Croatian Interlace by the President of the Republic of Croatia. Mr. Tollnauer, the floor is yours.
Invitation. Good afternoon from all grades. Mr. Pizzula had give me the possibility to be not long in that. First of all, I want to remind all of members that we have the specific situation in Croatia with me. With the minorities. Why? We are today 26 years of end of the war in Croatia. 26 Jahre, yeah. That's very important of when we want to speak about the progress in Croatia, and there's big progress in rights of national minorities. The Republic of Croatia, when the war are stopped, may conclude international agreements with the states of Europe, in this time European Union, United States, and all this international political, I can say, pressure in this time of regulation the issues in rights and freedoms of members of national minorities in Croatia. That was a result of this was the very important Constitution Act of Rights of National Minority. On states level, yeah. That's very important also to in this law are forming the Council for National Minorities on state level. This level. What is important? Who are the members of this council? 7 members of national minorities on local level. Let's say Mr. Pizzula addressed. What does this mean, local level? Yes, 5 members of national minorities coming from the the very important person of cultural, religion, and professional life who nominated the associations of organization of minorities. And very important is that the members of council are all 8 representatives of national minorities in Croatian parliament. Why is this very important? We have 22 minorities. We have 8 members in parliament of national minorities. But that all minorities have possibility to regulate all these issues and problems that we have. That's possible in Council of National Minorities. We can say that's a kind of government of national minorities. Council of National Minority is autonomous, but he is started in government of Croatia. He has the service in government of Croatia. That's the specific things in Croatia. Why? I am like a president on all the Sitzung von government. In government, when the questions of national minority in I speak with the president of government, the president of state, on all these problems, and now it's not problem to come to this level. We will have not the problem with this dialogue, but we have other problems. Today in Croatia is 2 national minorities who have the problems. That's the Roma national minority and Serb national minority. What we do, we have everyday contacts with government, with the local government of all these parties to how can I say? I know you think that we started of these problems like this, but that's not so easy. It's many political pressure and all these things in it. Why? The stuff of democracy give the minorities possibility to be in political, cultural, and life. We have that's now very important. We are in coalition with the government, and that's a special position. Why we have many, I don't want to say enemies, but problems with the extreme national parties. When we have also one problem with the language of Serb language, with Cyrillica. Members of Serb have the right to mix of the language. But on this post-conflict question, the Vukovar is the big problem with this. All these are when we say to regulate this question is on the weights on Council of National Minorities. I think that we have a good position with all these problems and issues. We have the way to come to the government, but all this, the biggest problem of all this is media. The minority are ignorant in media, and that's also a problem. When come the elections, the media give not possibility to all to say what the parties of some parties have in programs to yeah. Okay.
Ne? Dieses Problem, Herr Tollnauer, haben wahrscheinlich auch sehr,
Well, this problem, Mr. Tollnauer, is a problem of very many minorities who have no own media that they can finance. Sorry, I was a bit rude to interrupt you, but I have a question to your presentation, which is, what is the migration movement like? What has it been like in the last 10 years, the discussions in the Serbian minority in Croatia regarding the question of status and the future, and in which way comes support from Belgrade for the Serbian minority in Croatia in the last 2 years?
Migration migration how can I say, the 300,000 people is gone of Croatia to that's the problem of Serbish problem of Serbish minority. But the states of Serbia have the good connections with the representative of Serbs. And that must be I think so, the representative Serbs here in Croatia be a good ambassadors. How do you say? With the Croatia and Serbia, but now the relations are not so good. We are in council have a good relation with the ambassador of all this. Yes, with Serb consulate, and we have a good relation, and I think that we must be patient in this way. Yeah.
Eine weitere Frage, die richtet sich auch an Herrn Pizzula. Entschuldigen Sie.
Another question is addressed to Mr. Pizzula. Sorry that I pronounced it Piccola, but it's Pizzula. And to Mr. Tollnauer, to both of you. You said that about 4 or 5% you have of Serbian representatives. The other minorities have even less. Well, how do the elections make sure that such representatives or deputies are being elected, in fact? Because we have a 5% limit.
In Croatia are 8 positions for the representative are reserved. That's not question of the procents. Yes. The 8 of these are That's, yeah, but that's not a question. That's not only in Croatia. That's Slovenia have two. In Kosovo have. We are not only with this system.
The number doesn't depend
Bitte
on
noch näher, Herr Pizzula, näher ans Mikro, bitte.
Thank you
Closer
very
to the
much
microphone, please.
Thank you. Deeply sorry for the microphone. Well, the number of representatives does not depend on the number of voters. They have 8 mandates, Serbian minority 3, and I must say that the strongest Serbian political party, Independent Democratic Serbian Party, is the coalition partner of the ruling party, Croatian Democratic Union. So the best position of the Serbian political representatives are on the national level. In this moment, Croatian government has even the vice president who represents the Serbian minority in the country, Mr. Milosevic. So, well, the local levels are questionable, but the national level and the level of government are the best positions in this moment.
Herzlichen Dank.
Yeah, I want to tell something.
Yeah.
I want to apologize for my English and all this. No. I am 4 or 5 days of Corona, and please that you have this in order. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank
No
you for your
problem.
attention. Yeah.
Ja. Nehmen wir Satzung. Ich habe noch eine Frage. Die kleinen Volksgruppen.
Well, I do have a question. The smaller minorities have a joint seat, which they share. Well, how is that being regulated? Is there a principle of rotation? How do you decide on that?
It's who have the most voice of this group, in this group of national minorities.
Wir hatten ja die Medien auch angesprochen.
We have been talking about the media, or you have been talking about the media. Well, you have minorities who have a motherland who they can go back to, so to speak. But it's not a replacement for media. Well, how do minorities make sure that they can speak their mother tongue in their region and they can report in their language, or they can take advantage of cultural issues?
Government have agreement with the Croatian television. We have one Prisma is the name of this for the minorities. And when I tell you that in 4 programs of states television in 1 year, the minorities are 1% 0.3. That's the problem. That's the percent that was the minority programs in Croatia on the state. But I forget to tell you something what's very important. The Council of National Minority on state level distribution the fund state budget for cultural autonomy for national minorities. That's not that's the big money. In this year, we give 6 million euro for the programs and projects of national minorities. In this project is 56 minorities books and all of in this case that we on this way we have in the contact, but that must be in media. We have some kind of minority, the papers, the minority papers, and all this. Yeah, and that gives us one position that we are in media, but that's very. And we have one paper that's of Serb national minority, Novosti. We give money for this. The council gives money for this, and we have very big problems with the nationalists that and why have the Serb this. Yeah, but we must tell something. We must tell something. With now in this moment, with this government, with Mr. Plenković, we have big possibilities to regulate all these issues. I don't have to. I give some tip to the government, and so, but that's the true situation. And he to listen of these problems if you want to fix these problems.
Es ist wie in einem Krimi, wenn es am spannendsten, am schönsten
Well, it's like a crime story. When things get really exciting and thrilling, you have to cut people short and you have to leave the event. But we are the next country is waiting already. We probably will have to have yet another meeting in order to shed light on all different aspects about Croatia. But now we are getting to the third country report, Slovakia, which is a country which also has many different nationalities. I've already found a difference in front of it compared to Germany. In Germany, we are not allowed to ask your nationality, but we can see Slovakia, 81% of Slovak nationalities, and then we have a larger minority of Hungarians in Slovakia. Now, what does the situation look like? Janusz Butora is our first speaker. He is a professor of the School of Law of the National University School of Galway at the Institute of Legal Studies at the Hungarian University, and also a participant of the Roundtable of Hungarians in Slovakia. He has also been at the Central European University and the Howard Law School. His research focus is international human rights, in particular of national minorities, the rights of people with a handicap or disability, international conflicts, and ethnic conflict. As lawyer, he consults governments about their human rights, and he also consults advises a whole series of European Union parliamentary committees. And he has also been in contact with the in the United Nations Disabled Committee, voting rights, Benedict, like the right to education and not to be mistreated. In the past, he has also been an executive director of the Minority Rights Group Europe. So I'd like to give the floor first Other 10 minutes, I'm afraid, you have available for your speech only.
Thank you very much, dear Chair, for that very detailed introduction. I have nothing to add. I will make my best efforts to provide you with a general overview of minority protection in Slovakia in 10 minutes. So, as you heard before, Slovakia has a very sizable Hungarian population. They are the largest minority, around 500,000 people, which is almost 10% of the population. There is also a large Roma minority, and there are other smaller minority communities, Russians, Czechs, Germans, Ukrainians, Poles. But what is typical or what is defining for the country's minority policy is the large Hungarian population. It's one of the largest communities in terms of relative share in Europe, definitely in Central Eastern Europe. The constitutional structure does not reflect this fact. It's based on the concept of Slovaks being a state constituting nation, and minorities do not have an equal status. They have a tolerated status, which I call informal accommodation. So expressions of minority culture are not forbidden, but they're also not reflected in state substantive policies. However, because Hungarians, for example, are demographically dominant in certain regions, they have practical opportunities to use the Hungarian language and to practice their culture. This informal accommodation results in, it has certain consequences. The country still doesn't have a law on minorities. And there are very few obligations on the state to enforce minority rights. Because of the demographic conditions, for example, Hungarians have good opportunities to use their language, which the state often actually suppresses rather than promotes. The origins of this structure come from from after the Second World War, when the so-called Banesh decrees were adopted, which were based on the collective guilt on Hungarians and Germans. At that time, almost all Germans were expelled, many Hungarians were expelled, many were sent for forced labor, their property was confiscated. And I mentioned this because this sounds like a historical question, but very surprisingly, in the last 2 years, we have seen that these confiscations continue. So we have almost 200 cases from the last 2 years where property was confiscated from Hungarians based on these Banesh decrees. And one of these cases actually also went to the European Court of Human Rights. So it's Bosic against Slovakia, if you want to look it up. And these Banesh decrees defined the relationship between Slovaks as the state constituting nation and other minorities, mostly Hungarians, who are tolerated, but there are no specific provisions to take them into account. How does this affect certain areas? So in terms of political participation, there are no minority-specific provisions, nothing which helps minorities to gain political seats in parliament or on the local or regional level. There is a 5% general threshold for parliamentary elections. It means that currently there is no party representing minorities in the parliament. In the past, Hungarian parties were able to reach this threshold. Currently they are divided, so they do not reach. They nevertheless have more or less adequate representation at the local and regional level. Some smaller communities have representation on the local level. Russians, for example, and some Roma members. Nobody in parliament. In education, again, there is no law on minority education or minority school systems. Nevertheless, because of their demographic presence, Hungarians have a well-developed school system which teaches in Hungarian, but the needs of the school system are not taken adequately into account on the state level. So there is no methodological oversight specifically for Hungarian-speaking schools, no policy making. Their specific needs are just absent from policy making. And this results in several problems. Textbooks are not accommodated to the needs of Hungarian students, curriculum in general, secondary schools, the network doesn't reflect the needs of Hungarian-speaking students, and so on. So this neglect of the specific needs is a defining feature. It gets even more interesting when we get to the question of language use. Slovakia in 1995 adopted an infamous State Language Act, for which it was criticized internationally, which made the use of Slovak obligatory in several areas, and it was enforced by sanctions. So you could be fined, you could receive a financial sanction if you were not using Slovak in certain situations. In 1999, the law on the use of languages of national minorities was adopted, which makes certain exceptions from the State Language Act in some specific areas, both geographic and legal areas, but does not create equality. And as a result, in some cases, it's not prohibited to use minority languages like Hungarian. In other cases, it is still prohibited. And there are very few obligations on the states to actually support the use of minority languages. Hungarian is not an official language. So the Hungarian community is one of the largest in Europe, relatively speaking, which doesn't have its language recognized as an official language in the country. To my mind, only Russians in Baltic states and Russians in Ukraine are larger, relatively speaking, whose language is not an official language. So to use language rights, there is a threshold of 20%. In municipalities where minorities make at least 20%, they could use minority languages. But this threshold doesn't actually mean much. It doesn't create many obligations for the authorities. It simply means minority languages are not prohibited. I copied their provision from the law. So public bodies and their employees do not have to have the command of the minority language. So there is no obligation to hire speakers of minority languages among public officials, police, bureaucrats, and so on and so on. So obviously in Hungarian communities where Hungarians live, many public servants do speak Hungarian naturally, but it's not because of the legal requirements. I collected for you a few examples where minority languages are still prohibited. So where certain actors were fined for using minority languages. So for example, private regional TVs in Hungarian populated areas have to translate or subtitle everything to Slovak. There is no reciprocal obligation to subtitle or translate things to Hungarian. So Komárno TV was, for example, fined for broadcasting a Hungarian advertisement. Another TV was fined for broadcasting 2 sentences in Hungarian without translation in a news report. And this case is actually pending before the European Court of Human Rights. We are expecting the decision soon. There are Hungarian-speaking newspapers, which obviously publish things in Hungarian, but in Slovak-speaking newspapers, Slovak language newspapers, there can be no advertisements in Hungarian. One Slovak newspaper was fined for publishing an advertisement of a company from Hungary. Posters must be translated to Slovak. So this is a poster of a Hungarian youth camp where the authorities took actions against them for having Hungarian posters. Billboards also. This is a billboard of Hungarian newspaper, Hungarian weekly, which obviously is published in Hungarian, but they cannot advertise themselves in Hungarian because the law prohibits it. Touristic signs. So this is the town of Komárno, which has Hungarian majority. They have Slovak-only touristic signs, and when they put up Hungarian signs, they were threatened with a sanction of 33,000 euros. So they have to take down the Hungarian English sign. The state has a so-called language police, which go around the country and control mostly Hungarian municipalities for various minor infractions on the law, letterheads, names in minutes, posts on the billboards of the municipality, and so on. For all these, you can receive sanctions. Birth certificates should be bilingual under the law, but they are in practice filled out in Slovak only, which shows another lack of implementation of the law. And a few examples from other areas, because I'm conscious of the time. So healthcare, for example, under the law, patients do have a right to use a minority language, but again, there is no obligation on the authorities or healthcare providers to use the minority language. So we had an example where a patient was refused emergency treatment because she did not speak proper Slovak, and the doctor even wrote it down. I'm refusing to treat her because her Slovak is not good enough. And this is not violating the law. Post offices, the postal services, here we have an internal document which prohibits employees speaking Hungarian among each other. So even in Hungarian populated areas where there are many Hungarian employees, they cannot speak Hungarian even with each other. Transportation. Slovak Railways also in their internal orders prohibits employees speaking Hungarian to each other and to customers. Respectively, it orders them to speak Slovak. So as a result, we have language rights in the sense that minority languages are not prohibited in some areas. There are very few express obligations on the authorities to guarantee the use of language rights. So the result is that it depends on the goodwill of the authorities and private actors when they permit the use of minority languages. I'll provide you a few further examples of signs. So municipality signs in bilingual municipalities should be bilingual, but they're often missing, and even more often they are vandalized. More than 1/3 of Hungarian populated municipalities have experience with that. And other signs, because they are not mentioned in the law, cannot be bilingual. So these were put up by private actors. Hungarian translation of the Slovak road signs, they were taken down by the authorities. Same here. So road signs cannot be bilingual. Shops can be, but it very much depends on the decision of the owners, and bilingual signs are rare, but their number is actually increasing after campaigns of private individuals. Thank you very much. That's what I could fill into 10 minutes. A general overview of an informal accommodation, which means still dominant.
Nicht ganz, aber Sie haben dafür viele Fragen schon aufgeworfen. Dennoch,
well, you have been speaking a bit longer than 10 minutes, but you have raised and caused so many questions. I would like to come to the practical issues, even though you have reported so many things about practice. I'd like to speak to a man who is the ombudsman of the minorities of the Slovak Republic, and who has a general overview about the issues and problems minority groups have. So he has been doing a lot of work on these issues. Dr. Laszlo Bukowski is his name. He is a great expert. Since 2016, he has been the ombudsman of the government of the Slovak Republic for minority groups. Mr. Bukowski has 8 years experience for the rights of minorities. From 2011 onwards, he was also the director of the Department of Minorities of the Representative for Human Rights and National Minority Legislation, and he then became the director of minority rights in the office of the representatives of minorities. He has also been a member of Mostnet for 2000 and 2016. And before doing that, before looking after minority rights, he was busy in archiving. He is a doctor of philosophy, archiving, and history and philosophy, and he has is a doctor. He has a doctor title of the Slovakian University. Thank you very much. You have the floor. No sound? So sorry, we don't have any sound.
Bitte Mikro.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to make a short presentation. Of the proposed 3 topics, I will focus the current state of language rights of national minorities in Slovakia. In my presentation, if we'll look for answer to 2 questions. Why we are where we are in the field of application practice, and where we have moved in the last 5 years, and what are the biggest circumstances in the implementation. I consider language rights to be essential in the area of preserving and developing the identity of minorities. Since 1993, the Slovak Republic has subordinated its minority policy to the concept of building the Slovak nation state. However, the constitution guaranteed the language rights of national minorities. The implementing regulation, which is currently the Minority Language Act, was not adopted until 1999, and the indication of the implementation of the law were set to until 2 years later. The Slovak legal system recognizes 9 minority languages. The use of these languages in official communication in written and oral form and is conditioned by a minimum 20% threshold of the minority population and individual municipalities. This limit will be reduced to 15% next year when the result of the census will be known. The Minority Language Act guarantees certain collective and individual language rights for 9 minorities. This act was amended in 2011 and is brought several positive changes, and as well as specific safeguards for the enforcement of a language right. For example, appointment of a central state administration body responsible for methodological and professional assistance in implementing the law. Nowadays, it is the Office of the Government, respectively, my office is Office of the Plenipotentiary. Preparations of the report on the use of minority languages in application practice, which is submitted to the government every 2 years. Setting obligation of public administration bodies and legal entities non-compliance with which is an administrative offense and is financially sanctioned. In order to answer my first question briefly, the topic of minority language rights in Slovakia was and partly still is strongly politicized. For a long time, there was no legal framework, no state authority to guarantee the implementation of rights and a proactive approach of the state, including the provision of professional, methodological, and financial assistance. The present. In 2016, we set for the priority to improve and harmonize the implementation of language rights according to the valid legislation. After 17 years, we started from the scratch. The aim was to set systemic steps in professional and methodological assistance, to set up uniform interpretation of the law and its implementation in order to ensure legal certainty, and on the other hand, to provide language support for the implementation of the law. In the first step, we carried out an extensive analysis of the current situation at the level of state administration and self-governing bodies. In 2017, for the first time in history, the Slovak government took specific measures to improve the situation based on the research of the periodic reports. I note that the previous 2 reports were only taken into consideration by the government without further action. We developed a general methodological guideline for the implementation of the law, which was missing for almost 20 years. In 2019, it was also published in 5 minority languages. Then we prepared an analysis of legislation addressing language rights and analyzed the needs of training public and state administration employees in minority languages. Based on the statements of the state and local authorities, the biggest problems for implementation are ignorance of the law, missing of professional and methodological support, low language skills of employees, and lack of business financial resources. In my opinion, the biggest progress in this area was made in 2019 when we managed to introduce the education of district office employees in Hungarian and Ruthenian language. In the area of methodological assistance for the legal area, we have focused mainly on ensuring visual bilingualism as the most important component of minority language rights. There are no problems with designating institutions, but one crucial part of the law has been forgotten for almost 20 years. According to the law, public administration bodies, legal entities, and business entities are obliged to state all information, inscription, and announcement concerning the protection of life, health, safety, and property, in addition to the state language, also in the minority language in all public places in the so-called minority municipalities. As the law does not specify the nature and scope of this information at all, this obligation had been neglected. We have developed methodological guidelines to increase compliance. According to the guidelines, for example, road signs information, inscription, and announcement in the field of fire protection, in construction, in field of occupational safety and health, in public health, etc., have to be provided by responsive bodies also in minority languages. One of the good practice examples is that during a coronavirus pandemic, the information regarding the protection of life, health, and safety is stated almost everywhere in minority languages. I would like to mention one more problem. The lack of bilingual official forms is a long-standing problem regarding the use of minority languages in official communication. According to the law, all authorities must provide the citizens with official forms in the minority language based on their request. Although the situation in municipalities has recently improved, it remains to be a significant problem on the part of state authorities. Therefore, during last year, we prepared the guidelines for the state administration. Now we are facing a challenge because in the near future, the entire public administration will switch to an electronic communication system. Ladies and gentlemen, what is presented is brief information about the current state of minority language rights in Slovakia. In the last years, we have achieved several significant results, but are far from an optimal situation. It is sure that without an open professional communication, without a change in legislation, and without the necessary financial resources, it is not possible to make change. Thank you for your attention. Apologize for my poor English. My colleague Paula Augstova will interpret the answer to your questions. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Bukowski.
Many thanks, Mr. Bukowski. Firstly, the question you mentioned, visual bilingualism of information that will then also be presented in the minority language. Is that where this 20% threshold or 15% threshold is valid? Is it only valid for those regions where the inhabitants are at least 20%, or is it general for all of Slovakia?
Áno, na 20%, v súčasnosti na 20%. Nie, na 15%.
The visual bilingualism is only for these 20% municipalities. It's not for the whole nation.
Wie soll das dann mit der
And what about the electronic communication with the digital communication? How is it to work? Supposed to be working, because it's difficult to localize it. So how do you want to use it, or how is it meant to be used in future?
Že ako by ste chceli vlastne použiť tú elektronickú komunikáciu v budúcnosti tým, že tie bilingválne práva sú lokalizované na malé jednotky. Že ako si to predstavujete, ako je vaša predstava?
Vlastne súčasná legislatíva hovorí o menšinových obciach.
The current legislation is talking about the minority municipalities.
Ale podľa charty vlastne je to aplikovateľné na celé územie.
But according to the language charter, it can be applied to the whole territory of Slovakia.
A toto je naša vízia.
And this is our vision.
Aby sme toto presadili.
To make this happen.
Aby používanie nebolo vlastne viazané na menšinovú obec, ale na hociktoré územie Slovenska.
So that the use of language will not be bound only to municipality with a share of national minorities, but for a whole Slovakia.
Eine Frage
One question to János Fiala-Bútora. It came during your presentation. What is the situation, for example, of the media in other minorities in Slovakia, outside of the Hungarian minority? You showed a very drastic picture on the situation of the Hungarian minority. What is the situation with the other minorities?
There are more than 10 minority communities in Slovakia, and usually they are very small. So their access to media in their own language very much depends on the demographic conditions. Very few of them have newspapers in their language. There is a Roma newspaper. There are some bilingual publications in Rusin, but most smaller minority communities have very little written newspaper, and even less they do not have their own TV stations or radio stations. The public broadcasting, the public radio station does broadcast in some of the smaller languages, but only certain time periods during the day. So obviously, because of their smaller demographic presence, their access to media is even much worse than of Hungarians.
Wie sehen Sie dann Ihre
And how do you see your possibilities as a minority to demand more rights, to legally fight for your rights, especially since Slovakia also signed the European Charter for minority languages? There are certain passages that show that minorities do have certain rights.
I'm very skeptical about the European minority protection treaties. They are very weakly implemented. So yes, they do provide certain rights on paper, but in terms of enforcing those treaties, I think we have seen very little progress. And the Hungarian minority did actually made quite a lot of efforts on the European level, both by reports and by taking legal action. I mentioned some cases which are going to the European Court of Human Rights. It's a very long and ineffective process, in my opinion, and the promises of EU accession were also not fulfilled. So there is a quite general disillusionment with legal action on European level, I think. So we have to rely on the political processes in Slovakia, which were also not very promising. The international options, I think, suffer from weak enforcement.
Wir haben aber in unserer Reihe
But
heute
in our series today, we have the representative of for national minorities. So maybe you can formulate some demands concretely, but I do have a question before to you, Mr. Bukowski. You mentioned language rights. Can we understand it that in such a way that the minorities are being reduced to your language? Because minority rights, in my understanding, is much broader. It's not just language, it's culture, it's education, it's social participation and political participation. How do you define this term language rights in relation to
O jazykových právach hovoríme, respektíve o právo vzdelávania v materinskom jazyku hovorím o tom, lebo vlastne tieto dve aspekty sú upravené zákonom.
We are talking about the minority language rights, about the rights to be educated in the minority language, because these areas are regulated by the law.
A čo sa týka participácie, žiadny zákon to nerieši podľa národnosti.
Regarding the participation of national minorities, for example, there is no law regulating such a thing.
Participácia je zabezpečená vyslovene len na základe politických práv.
Participation is provided only according to the political rights.
Vlastne v súčasnosti pracujeme na ucelenom zákone.
Right now we are working on the general law on national minorities.
Chceme riešiť vlastne komplexne celú otázku národnostných práv.
And we want to solve the complex question of national minority rights. So not only a language, but also other areas.
Ale ako vidíte slovenskú politickú scénu,
But looking at the Slovak political scene,
takže neviem, či sa nám to vôbec podarí.
We are not sure whether we can push this forward.
Ale sme optimisti, lebo prvýkrát v histórii Slovenska
But we are optimistic because for the first time in the history of Slovakia,
prvýkrát sa dostalo do programového vyhlásenia vlády,
for the first time there is in the manifesto of Slovak government,
že sa pripraví zákon o postavení národnostných menšín.
That such a right will be prepared about the status of national minorities.
Herzlichen Dank. Hier sind weitere Fragen eingegangen, und zwar, die richten sich an beide, sowohl an Herrn László Bukowski als auch János Fiala-Butora. Sehen Sie einen langsamen Weg der Assimilation der jüngeren Generation, die sozusagen die ungarische Sprache verlernt oder gar nicht mehr lernt? Da müsste ich gucken, wer das geschrieben hat. Zumindest derjenige, der mir das geschrieben hat, kennt Studenten und junge Leute, dass sie besser Slowakisch sprechen als Ungarisch sozusagen. Und, Moment. Ja, und ob dieses dann nicht die ungarische Community, die Allgemeinheit, in einem schwächt, Und die nächste Frage ist gleich, Sinti und Roma mit ungarischer Muttersprache und ungarischen nationalen Identity, wie da im Moment jetzt, wie sehen Sie deren Rolle? Das die 3 Fragen an von Meinolf Ahrens kommt die Frage. Bitte.
Just very shortly, yes, obviously, assimilation is a result and the major problem, and it's not slow. So in the last 20 years, I think the number of Hungarians fell by 120,000, so almost 20% of the community. It's a huge loss about which we are very concerned. So this kind of imbalance, inequality, discrimination does result in a certain proportion of younger generations giving up the language, losing the language for various reasons. About ideological fights, I don't think they are that bitter. I think it's normal that a large community is not homogeneous, that there are people with different worldviews present in the community. So I think it's an artificial requirement that all members of the community, would be ideologically on the same side. That rarely happens. About Roma with Hungarian language, well, I'm not sure what the question is, but yes, a significant proportion of Hungarians are of Roma origin, and a significant proportion of Roma are Hungarian speakers. So they have a dual identity. They are both part of the Roma community, and they are both part of the Hungarian community. Many Hungarian language schools only exist because there are Roma children going into those schools. So yes, there are cumulative problems with that specific community, both from a language and a social rights perspective. Thank you.
Asimilácia. Vlastne na Slovensku máme 13 národnostných menšín. A samotný ten asimilačný proces, podľa posledných výsledkov sčítania, sa sťahuje minimálne na polovicu národnosti. Najväčšia je to v rámci maďarskej menšiny.
The most visible is Hungarian minority.
Potom je tu ukrajinská menšina.
Then here is also Ukrainian minority.
Týka sa to aj nemeckej národnostnej menšiny.
It is also concerning German national minority.
A českej.
And the Czech national minority.
Zase na druhej strane vidíme nárast u rusínskej a rómskej menšiny.
On the other hand, we are also seeing increasement on the side of Roma national minority and Ruthenian national minority,
ktoré svojím spôsobom prežívajú nejaký boom, nejaké navýšenie alebo zvýšenie počtov.
Whose population is kind of growing, or enlightened population in their minority race.
Ktoré bude zase výzvou pre celú slovenskú spoločnosť.
It will be a challenge for a whole Slovak population.
Aj na aplikáciu menšinových práv.
Also for the application of language rights.
Hlavne u rómskej menšiny.
Especially regarding Roma minority.
Že či to vôbec budeme vedieť zabezpečiť tie práva.
Whether we will be even able to make these laws happen or implement in practice.
Vidíme, že za posledné 10 ročia aké problémy máme za sebou.
When we see that during the last decades we had really several severe problems.
Čo sa týka asimilácie v rámci maďarskej menšiny,
regarding the assimilation within Hungarian national minority,
ja najväčší problém vidím v tom,
I see the biggest problem,
že vlastne to územie, kde maďarská menšina býva,
the territory where the Hungarian national minority is living,
prechádza, alebo cez to územie prechádza obrovská migračná vlna.
Through this territory, the huge migration wave,
ktoré vlastne zmení podľa mojich odhadov po výsledku sčítania to samotné národnostné zloženie tých obcí.
And we are expecting that after nowadays census, this territory will change a lot regarding the population of national minorities living in Hungarian municipalities.
Herr Bukowski,
Well, Mr. Bukowski, now this is the last question to you. I'd like to give you a short answer, but it's very close to what you said. You're saying that the number of speakers of minority languages is decreasing. You know that the European, the Council of Europe Committee has always been skeptical when it came about percentage clauses when it comes to speakers of different languages. Well, don't you think it's high time to think about that 15 or a 20% clause? Is it realistic, really? Because it kind of prevents the application of the legislation and the implementation of the application if the speakers decrease in number. Because this is one of the highest clause of any of the members of the signing parties of the Charter. Do you think that there may be any changes in this percentage, that the percentage may be lower?
To samotné číslo, ktoré je v zákone, vlastne bolo zmenené z pôvodných 20%.
The number which is now in the law was changed from the
Ja, wir haben ja jetzt schon diese erste Abänderung und Minderung, Reduzierung der Zahl von 20 auf 15%.
Lebo jednoducho politická vôľa nebola na zmenu tohto čísla.
There was no political will to change it.
Also ich glaube nicht, dass da ein politischer Wille besteht, diese Zahl noch weiter zu reduzieren. Glaube ich nicht.
Okay.
V roku 2011
In 2011,
pôvodný návrh pri novele zákona
the first proposal within the amendment of the law
bol 10%.
was 10%.
Es gab zwar einen ersten Antrag, der daraus bestand, also diese Prozentsatzzahl auf 10% zu reduzieren.
Ale v rámci koalície nedošlo k dohode.
But there was no deal within the coalition.
Aber die Koalition war dazu nicht bereit, dieses Gesetz abzusegnen. Und der endgültige Kompromiss war 15%.
Zaviedla sa quasi metóda alebo mechanizmus.
And the mechanism was introduced.
Und es wurde ein Mechanismus eingeführt.
Že teraz po vyhlásení výsledkov sčítania
Now, when the census results will be known,
obce, ktoré dosiahnu dvakrát za sebou 15%,
municipalities will reach this clause of 15% for 2 times in previous censuses.
Man musste da zweimal darauf bestehen, damit man also überhaupt diese 15% auch erreichen konnte.
They'll get to the list of national minorities.
Und es ging auch um die Frage der Liste der Minderheitensprachen, ging mehr darum, das Recht überhaupt zu haben, seine Minderheitensprache zu verwenden.
A vypadnúť zo zoznamu menšinových obcí.
And there is also a thing that some of the municipalities can get out of this list.
Bude možné až len najbližšie po vyhlásení výsledkov sčítania v roku 2030.
But this will be able only after the census results of 2030.
Zaviedlo sa mechanizmus, že dvakrát za sebou, ak získa alebo dosiahnu 15%, sa dostanú do zoznamu.
When they get twice in a row 15%, they will get into the list.
A keď trikrát za sebou nedosiahnu 15%,
and when they will not get 3 times in a row or 15%, they will get out of the list.
Tak to bola základom tej politickej dohody.
So that was the core of this political deal. So no political will.
Gut. Dann herzlichen Dank Ihnen, Herr Laszlo Bukowski.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Bukowski.
Thank you.
I would like to express my gratitude to all of you and to all the speakers, to Elizabeth Schandl-Schuller, Mr. Ballas, Sultan Vizi, Baboshka Pichula, Alexander Tolnauer, Janusz Butora, Laszlo Bukowski. Thank you very much to all the speakers, and thank you to all the audience. And also thank you very much to our interpreters. The interpreters thank for listening. And now I'm going to give the floor back to our host. Thank you very much for this perfect moderation. And to close the circle, I would like to come back to Mr. Beaker's words. Representative of the European Parliament, he talked about the First World War, the end of the First World War, and the peace treaties, which caused a lot of problems. We always say it's an art. It's an art to have a good peace treaty. And the peace treaties at the end of the First World War created problems we are still suffering from. Some minority problems had been removed, but others had been created. New minorities problems were created because it used to be Austria-Hungary. And today, Hungary, Slovakia, Croatia, all these countries belong to Hungary. So they fit together very well at the time. Then, and as a consequence of the First World War, there have been problems. I understand that these problems were created, but it's 100 years ago. And we can see that the Serbs and the Croatians are still there after all this long Serbian-Yugoslavian war. But I think it's very difficult to get together again. But after these, you realize that what problems the First World War caused. There were 4 peace treaties and there were kind of minority protection clauses, but no one looked after them. No one controlled them. There was no one there to check on them. There were 5 minority treaties which had a specific minority protection clauses. There were also unilateral declarations guaranteeing minority protection. So the First World, or the end of the First World, created all these problems. We can see Italy and Southern Südtirol, and we can see the same in Hungarian, because Hungary lost like 2/3 of its former size, of its former territory. So this is just my final comment. Thank you very much for these highly interesting presentation. I don't want to stress anyone, but in particular, but I think it's interesting that in Hungary, you have to be there for 100 years before being recognized as a minority. In Austria, there was once a generation. It has to be 3 generations in Austria. In Central Europe, I live in Marburg, which has 80,000 inhabitants, 126 minorities. Well, Germany originally said we only have the Sinti, Romas, the Danes, and the Friesen. Can we afford it? Can we support that many groups of minorities which are being created? So it's not only a problem of Germany, Italy, Austria, or whatever. It's a problem we all share. So I think we are going to be have to face serious questions. And I don't think if that theory of having to be there for 100 years to be recognized can be maintained. Mrs. Schandl-Schuller has explained very well the role of an ombudsman or an ombudswoman is a great idea. It's a great example which could be copied, or the example of 8 reserved seats in the Croatian parliament is an idea which other countries could copy. The summary about Slovakia has been rather sobering. I think there is a lot of work ahead for Slovakia, and therefore it's highly important that we keep on having this event here. I have been to Slovakia many times, but I haven't realized that, because we hardly ever read anything about it up in the German press about maybe that the Hungarian radio program had been prohibited. So I think it's been interesting to find out so many things about Slovakia. You have already given me your words of gratitude, but I would like to give, I know that on the 29th of April, which is in a month's time and a few days, we are going to have yet another event of this kind. Ukraine, Estonia, and Bulgaria are going to be invited. Until then, thank you very much. Have a good time and stay healthy. And hopefully we are already being vaccinated when we're going to meet again. Thank you very much and goodbye.